Welcome to Uninvited, the show where we cover news that matters to Ontario women. On this program, we're talking about Ontario's escalating housing crisis. We discuss the challenges renters face on a daily basis, and we dissect a rental market that's designed to reward landlords. But first, here are some recent headlines. From the west coast to the east, Canadians are suffering record-breaking rainfalls, flooding, and deadly mudslides. People stranded, communities devastated, and roadways washed away. BC is declaring this the worst natural disaster in generations. With months of cleanup yet to begin, the scope of the damage has been difficult to comprehend. And these tragic stories across the country are forcing us to take a deeper look at the impact of climate change, all only a few short weeks after the G20 Environmental Summit in Italy. Meanwhile, here in Ontario, the Ford government is nowhere near achieving its 2030 targets for cutting greenhouse gas emissions. Premier Ford had promised Ontario would match the national target of reducing annual CO2 emissions by over 17 megatons. Instead, emissions have risen since Doug Ford took office in 2018. Ford's future proposed projects, like the controversial Highway 413, will only increase emissions further, according to Keith Brooks of the Environmental Defense. And then when you look at a project like the Bradford Bypass, it'll add more cars and more than 17 million tons of greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. Now, both proposals have been resurrected by the Ford government after being dismissed by previous governments, as thinking has since evolved around the effect new roads actually have on traffic congestion. Simply that new roads attract more drivers, and in reality, they don't do much to fix congestion. The Premier is also keeping the true ecological damage of these projects under wraps. The federal government is intervening on Highway 413, saying they're concerned about whether the provincial process would address environmental issues. And the Ford government also exempted the Bradford Bypass for an updated environmental assessment. And as the province prepares to foot massive construction bills, taxpayers are left in the dark as the government continues to withhold cost estimates for the project. Meanwhile, Premier Ford has waived $1 billion in bills owed to the government by the private owners of the 407 toll highway. At the same time, the Financial Accountability Office of Ontario recently released a report revealing that the provincial government underspent healthcare by nearly $1 billion in Q2 of 2021. That same report detailed how the Ford government also underspent on education by $686 million and $800 million less for children and youth services, resulting in funding cuts for children and adults with disabilities. Families are calling this unconscionable. Ontario's glitchy new online business registry is so rampant with problems and shutdowns that major law firms are recommending clients avoid registering in the province altogether. Hundreds of problems have been cited daily, ranging from system crashes during business hours to data issues, and it's all adding up to significant costs for business owners. Among those suffering the most are the same small businesses that already struggled significantly during the pandemic. To the relief of many parents, the province finally began rolling out the approved Pfizer vaccine to more than 1 million children aged 5 to 11. This comes at a pivotal time, with recent statistics showing that a third of the province's COVID cases are in school-aged children. Medical evidence has shown that children who get COVID might not become seriously ill, but can still suffer long-term effects that are difficult to predict, and they can spread the virus to more vulnerable people. Appointments can be booked through the COVID-19 vaccination portal and contact centers, as well as participating pharmacies. Vaccination for babies and toddlers are expected to be approved early in the new year, with clinical trials well underway, offering further hope for parents of young children. Our program today is about the rapidly escalating housing crisis here in Ontario. From rent control to home ownership, quality and affordable housing is quickly becoming the stuff of fairy tales in this province. Renters are living paycheck to paycheck. Millennials are priced out of the purchasing market, and fully employed people are couch surfing. Now, housing is a human right, and we're on the brink of a humanitarian emergency here in Ontario. We're going to start by taking a look at our broken renting system. In Ontario, when tenants move out, landlords are free to increase rents by any amount, creating incentive for landlords to push out long-term tenants. Landlords often neglect essential repairs like elevator or heating maintenance to make housing unlivable for the tenants until they choose to move themselves. Or sometimes landlords create bogus complaints against their tenants so they can evict and jack up the rent. Half of Ontario renters pay more than 30% of their income to their landlords, and a fifth of renters pay more than 50%. When half of your paycheck is going to rent, tenants are trapped in a cycle that they'll never get out of. And for families, that cycle can be devastating, leaving parents no opportunity to save for their children's education or plan for emergencies. As for the buying market, supply simply isn't keeping up with demand. The average home price in Ontario has increased by over 26% in a single year, meaning that a down payment for many Ontarians is impossible. And this just isn't an issue for Southern Ontario. Megan McDonald, who's a caseworker for Lake Country Community Legal Clinic, is seeing displacement happening all across Sudbury and North Bay as families are running out of options. She says she's already begun to see a wave of homeless families like she's never seen before. When other U.S. cities like Chicago and New York are faced with similar housing affordability issues, their governments stepped into the market to even it out and increase supply. But here in Ontario, Premier Ford and his relationship with large-scale developers and real estate investors has made it clear that affordability is not his number one priority. For example, he's canceled rent control on new units, and he's abandoned Ontario's targets for ending homelessness by 2025. But the truth is, preserving the status quo is no longer an option for the hundreds of thousands of Ontarians struggling just to keep a roof over their heads. Today, we're going to be joined by Alejandra Ruiz-Vargas from ACORN, the Association of Community Organizations for Reform Now. Since 2004, ACORN has won several important victories for Ontarians, including payday lending legislation, raising minimum wage, and housing rights bylaws across the country. Alejandra and her team fight for affordable housing through landlord licensing, tenant rights, building inspections, and stronger enforcement of maintenance rules. Alejandra, thank you for being here today. Tell us a bit about yourself and about why you've been involved in housing.
No, first of all, thank you for having me. Well, I am an immigrant. I'm working with housing since 2015. I'm a single mother. I love Toronto, and I don't like what is happening right now here with the housing crisis. I had to speak with people, for people that don't have the voice, and this is why I united with ACORN.
Was there something that motivated you or something that happened that made you want to get involved in on this issue?
Well, I was homeless for 11 months, and then I started to work with housing. I work with no-profit housing, and I started to see a lot of injustice. So I say, this cannot continue like that.
Give us the lay of the land in terms of like what the housing, as some people call it a crisis, is like right now. What is it like?
Well, I think so. It's beyond a crisis. I will call it a tornado, and without very little tools to resolve the situation or the issue. We had people living, 10 people in a basement because the prices are insane and it's no real rent control. We had people that have been waiting for repairs for 2 years. It's a battle. It's become a battle for us as a tenants. There are people who had 3 jobs and they still having trouble to pay the rent. And it's very difficult sometimes to find 9 to 5 jobs. And when you're a mother, what are you going to do? Or when you're a single parent, what are you going to do?
I guess we've come around to this idea that housing is an investment. It's a commodity, right? As opposed to thinking of housing as a right that people have. To have proper housing, to have affordable housing. And we sort of change the way we think about housing in order to fix those problems.
We need to think that it's a human right. And when we commercialize housing, that is a human right, we're going to see effects in the lives of people. Housing is a human right, but it's not by granted. And it's so sad. This affects the morale of the people and out there. To the point that people are like, why I even try when I go work, pay my rent, and don't have even money to buy groceries, like proper groceries. So it's pretty depressing.
So is that part of the answer then? More government involvement, more legislation, more protections. What are some of the solutions then?
Well, there are a lot of solutions, but it's not really a lot of will. Governments, normally when a market is inflated, what they do, they cool it down. But this government has not done that at all. When you had a fire, we don't even think about it. We run and we put water or we call 911. Here it's like the fire is there and they splash here. Oh, let's splash here, let's splash here, a little bit of water, but the fire is coming. We don't have rent control in the city of Toronto and Ontario. We don't have rent control. When you move out, and I moved now in, and the landlord has the ability to put whatever rent he wants. Why? Because the Rent Tenancy Act has a loophole that is called vacancy decontrol. The government opened the door to the landlords to be bad people.
So I guess you hear all these stories about terrible landlords, terrible renting experiences. How desperate do people become?
When they're looking for an apartment and they say, okay, I had 20 people before you. What you can offer me that these people cannot offer? And people are like, okay, I give you $2,000 more. I give you whatever because I don't want to be homeless. And they know they had the power. And again, this power has been given by the government. And we had developers and we had landlords that they really have been making, the big bucks. So they had some responsibility.
On the show, we focus a lot on women's issues. And
Yes.
so from the perspective of a woman, a mother, a working mother, perhaps, what does the situation look like for them?
Yeah. Well, being a woman is difficult per se, isn't it? And especially when your children are in your care and you not had too much opportunities. This is why I never understand why people say that poor people is lazy. It's not the case. It's no opportunities. It's lack of opportunity. Sometimes people go and try, but it's like a door closed here, a door closed here, a door closed here, so then you give up. Many women don't leave their abusive partner because where am I going to go? How am I going to pay the rent? How am I going to pay the kids? I don't even know how to even use the system.
Which means if we were to do nothing, if we were just to let things be status quo, what does that future look like?
Well, more people dead, for sure. Right now, there are so many people when I was walking in the streets, but it's a little bit mild, but when it's coming minus 30, but more people dead. The stress, the pressure, your mental health is going to go to the roof. And the other thing is poverty, totally related to safety. Less poverty, more safety. I coming from a city that is huge. It's 12 million people. It's Bogota. And poverty, a lot of problems. When I came here 17 years ago, this was paradise. For me, it was like, wow, I cannot believe middle income, living with low income, and things all so good. But this is a vague memory now. We are in the Wild West, isn't it? It's like, you move, let's put a little bit of paint, a nice stove, and boom, baby, $1,000 more for rent. And this has been what is increasing, and our government has been allowed that.
We've been talking a lot about renting, but for some people, they want to own their own homes. Is that even a reality anymore for a lot of people?
For other people, it's not even a dream anymore. No, even you can even imagine in your wildest dreams, because how are you going to pay $1 million for a home? The thing is, the government, again, needs to stop the foreigners buyers that come in pretending that they have a very modest income, and then they buy or purchase these properties. Nobody is living there. But 2 years later, they made $200,000. So it's a good business for them, but for us, it's awful. This is the government needs to cool down this market right now. And they had the tools, they had the ability, they had the power. Look at New Zealand. They did it. Why we cannot?
So Premier Ford was recently asked about housing, about minimum wage, and he himself said he couldn't live on $15 an hour. We've talked about the role that government could play in fixing some of these issues and goes a long way. So what would be your message to the premier and to his government on this particular issue?
He can have the power to right now freeze rent for 5 years until we get from the pandemic, isn't it? Because we need probably 5 years, and this will cool the market. There needs to be more social housing. There needs to be more supported housing. There needs to be more housing for basic income. So that way, everybody of the community and the society will be taken care. Right now, Mr. Ford is saying that he wants that more people, that more developments being built, but without all these things that ACORN has been working, like the rent control, more housing, but at the same prices, more people attracted to buy, but really, we, the workers, the low income, the moderate income, the middle class, how are we going to purchase?
You're a mother, I'm a mother as well. And, you know, thinking about our children one day being able to have a good place to live, afford their own home, based on all these conversations we're having about housing, seems so far off and so impossible. What do you tell your children? How do you prepare them, and how do we make things better for them?
As a community, we need to resist. We as a community, we cannot allow that this happens to our children. We cannot leave this legacy to our children. We need to go and we need to speak out. And we need to call our MPs, we need to call our mayor, we need to call our councilors, we need to call everybody who has the power to do some change. And yes, I'm scared for our generation. I'm scared for my child. If we don't do something now, we cannot leave this mess to our children.
Alejandra, we really appreciate you joining us here today. Thank you so much. And thank you all for tuning in. This has been Uninvited, Working Ontario Women News. It's time for a segment that we call I'm Speaking, where you can send us your 60-second message at actwow.ca. Tell us what you're thinking, what you're feeling, what you're frustrated about, and your concerns, and we'll put it to air. You've been watching Uninvited. Now, I'm speaking.
I'm speaking.
I have to
I'm
weigh
speaking.
in.
I'm speaking. I'm speaking. If you don't mind letting me finish. I'm speaking.
Hi, I'm Basali and I'm from Woodbridge, and I'd like to talk about university, specifically the university tuition costs. I've noticed ever since the pandemic, we've had the same exact costs as other years, and that honestly is really unreasonable to have because our year is quite different from any other as we're completely online. The same standard of teaching isn't the same standard of teaching as it was if it was in person. And I ended up just staying in my res and staying in res for the entire time and self-teaching myself. So putting that extra cost of res money as well as my tuition, I ended up paying over like 25 grand just to sit in my room and teach myself, you know? It really took, like, this pandemic has not just taken a toll on our physical and mental health, but it's also taken a toll on us financially. And I don't know why the reason it is to keep it the same cost. It really is unreasonable, and I wish that this would change.
My name is Ria, and I'm a resident in Richmond Hill, Ontario. I'm calling on my provincial government to stop privatizing public education. It's about time that they listen to key stakeholders in education, including students, parents, and educators. We're speaking, and it's time for you to listen.